Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive's author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby, and your host, DJ Payne.
G'day and welcome to Thrive Deeper, episode 120. It is I, your humble host, DJ Payne, and this is your favourite Bible study podcast with Matthew Jacoby. Dr. Matt, your good buddy and my good friend. And on this episode, we sit down and we finish the book of Deuteronomy. We started it on the last episode. We're going to finish it on this one. And this is a bit sentimental to me because we are finishing off the last book in the 5 books of Moses. You might have heard it called the Pentateuch. You might have heard it called the books of the law. You might have even heard it called the Torah. This is it. We say goodbye to this leader, this guide, Moses. It's a big episode, this one, so get ready with your Bible, crack it open to the Old Testament, and open up that copy of Thrive, the Daily Reading Guide, and let's enjoy this episode of Thrive Deeper. Okay, Matt, we're making progress here in the studio in the office. The boxes are disappearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Okay, you can actually make your way into the studio.
I can.
Last week when we were recording with Bernie Power, I think you and him were like literally sitting underneath boxes when you're in here recording.
It's looking nice.
We're getting there. Yeah. We're getting there in the studio office. It's looking great. Now, if you want to see some pictures of that, we're going to put some. Once I finish here, we're going to put some up on our brand new Thrive Supporter Facebook group. And my mission this week is to try to drag Matthew into that Facebook group so he can actually interact with people. How does that sound?
Okay.
Dear. Listen, don't worry. If you do put something in there that Matthew has to see, I will make sure he sees it. Now, this is it. This is an exciting episode. Episode 120. This is our second part of our 2-part on the book of Deuteronomy. The last book of Moses.
Yep.
That's right. We're saying goodbye to Moses on this episode.
Yeah, we are.
Because, just to let everybody know, next fortnight and the next edition is a brand new edition of Thrive.
Yeah.
And we go right from the old, from the times of Moses, right at the beginning of the Old Testament, all the way to the book of Acts.
I know, it's going to be great.
It's a massive jump. So I'm already feeling a bit nostalgic and sad saying goodbye to Moses here. So this is like our Moses send-off episode.
Yeah, that's right. So this is the second episode where we look at Deuteronomy, which is the instructions that God gives to his people through Moses. And in particular this week, I thought we should take the time to look at what is, I would suggest, the most controversial and most criticized part of the whole Bible.
Yep. Oh wow, the whole Bible.
Yeah, I would say this is the one that I've heard more than any other because of its harshness. It's the allegation is that in the Bible we have God commanding genocide.
Yes.
And
it is one of the tropes, when you see apologetics being argued in debates and stuff like that. The book of Deuteronomy and the book of Leviticus are always trotted out together as arguments against, against God.
Yeah. So the purity laws are often rolled out, but they're a little more complicated. This is an easy target in a sense. These injunctions. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just read a little bit of chapter 7. Which is the edict. So what we're going to look at now is the edict as they're at the edge of the promised land. God's giving them the land.
Yeah.
And he commands them, you've got to wipe them out completely.
Yeah.
The land has got to be it's like taking a big sponge and it's going to be completely wiped clean.
Yeah.
It's going to be cleansed completely. There's this sense in which, and in many of the cities, there's a sort of technical language around this is a city devoted to destruction, and the language is almost like the language of sacrifice, like a whole burnt offering.
Wow.
It's like it must be wholly obliterated.
Wow.
And
there's some military language in this as well.
Yeah.
Like as in like this next generation of Israelites that are coming into the promised land, they're getting organized and they're psyching themselves up underneath Joshua, as in our whole life is going to be, the next couple of generations is going to be about military conquest.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So let me read just the first part of chapter 7. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess, and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. This is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God, and the Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. So, in many other places as well, just, littered throughout the book of Deuteronomy is again this edict. You go in now, and the word that's used, in fact, this talks about destroying them completely, wiping them out, showing. So this is, in a sense, it's depicting what is really going to be a slaughter. Wholesale slaughter.
Can we? Sorry to interrupt. Can we say? Would you argue that this is one of the few, this is the blueprint of one of the few commanded holy wars?
Yeah.
We hear about a holy war, or we talk about these people are fighting like a holy war, but this is like the blueprint of an actual God-commanded holy war.
Yeah. Well, this is the only holy war.
Wow.
In fact, and it's important to it only ever happened once.
Wow.
And I'm going to talk about the once in a moment, because even the stuff that David is doing is essentially completing this.
Wow.
Okay, so
the other kings who follow way down the track after Moses.
It's essentially just completing this.
That's a great point.
So there's nothing.
I like that. Yes.
And David is the one famously who kind of brings this to completion. And look, other kings make compromises. They lose ground. They need to take it back. So you get a bit of that. David is the one famously who completes this task.
Wow.
Okay, and initially it was going to be. Initially, of course, Saul was installed as king.
Yes,
and you notice that with King Saul, the big test is when it's is he willing to complete the conquest? Is he willing to put this in place? And so he has this battle with one of these kings, and the question is he willing to completely destroy them and
follow this commandment?
To follow this
chapter
commandment,
7.
And he's not, and as a result, he's demoted as king, because really the role of the leader is to actually is to enact this one-off, and in a sense to finish this holy war, so that God's rule can be established. So the idea of the king is to sort of maintain God's rule in the land. Okay, so it's once. It only ever happened once. So what we're talking about here isn't like, throughout the Old Testament, God is always telling his people. No, it only ever happens once. Interestingly, the most common word that's used is not that of go and kill everyone, but actually drive them out. Okay. So mostly what we're talking about here is them being driven out. Also says that this would happen gradually. It says in verse 22 of chapter 7, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you little by little. So notice it's driving them out. He will drive out those nations before you little by little. You will not be allowed to eliminate them all at once, or wild animals will multiply around you. But the Lord your God will deliver them over to you, throwing them into great confusion until they are destroyed. So the idea here is that God is driving them out, but there are some who they're going to hold on, and the idea here is don't compromise. Don't make them your servants. Don't make them your slaves. Don't enter any treaties with them. Mm-hmm. They've got to be, if they insist on staying, it's like they need to be completely destroyed.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got something here that is enormously, that's still harsh, okay?
Yeah. So this is so let's just set the picture here. This is at the end of life of Moses, so we're talking what, about 1400 BC?
Yep.
Maybe 1300.
Yep, 1400, yep.
Somewhere
right,
around there, before Christ. As they're about to enter the promised land, right? The Israelites, the Jewish people, are about to enter the promised land. The 12 tribes there, under the new leader of Joshua, they're commanded by Moses. They're commanded by God in this time to start this holy war. You say that David finishes the holy war.
Yeah.
How many hundreds of years later?
Well, David is about 1,000. So by the time Solomon rules, it's about 900.
So it takes about 400 years to complete this.
That's right. So Solomon, because of David's campaigns, Solomon possesses the promised land.
Yeah.
He never has to.
Becomes one of the greatest world powers ever.
Now, what we need to recognize too is that it was never. We've said it's a one-off thing. It was sort of dirty work in a sense. It was like when you start with, and I'm going to talk about give a bit of background in a moment. Yeah. It's interesting to note that when David says to God, "Okay, we've occupied the land. Hey, now I want to build you a temple." God says, "No, you're not building me a temple. You've got blood on your hands."
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, what?
Well,
what?
I was doing what.
No. That's
your son's job.
So that's right. So there's a sense. So Solomon gets to build the tabernacle because Solomon is a man of peace. And this is what God wanted to get to. Okay, so this is holy war isn't the thing. It isn't the way. It had this one-off moment, right, in history. And I'm going to talk. So just hold on to your seats. If you're sitting there in absolute shock and you've not been exposed to this before, just hang on for a moment. But notice, because when I'm thinking if we can step across to Thrive Perspectives. We did a conversation with Bernie Power about Islam and the holy wars, which have been a regular occurrence in the growth of Islam. The Bible doesn't have anything. This is just a one-off. This one-off moment. It even is recognized as a kind of necessary evil. The principle of necessary evil is quite important here. Necessary evil is when a really bad thing is done, but it's the only right thing to do in that situation. It's like putting someone in jail, or it's a terrible thing to do.
Capital punishment.
Or capital punishment. Yeah. But there are some, there are some times when that's the only right thing to do. So that's where that kind of sits in terms of the Bible, because this is moving towards is. Again, Solomon is the man of peace. That's a very important, I think, indication of what God was after. And of course, then when you get to Jesus, he's saying, if your enemy strikes you, turn the other cheek. And he's speaking to a Jewish people who are living in a time when this very promised land was occupied by the Romans. And they're saying, we need to now get them out of the promised land.
Bring back the holy war.
Yeah. That's right. Let's bring back the holy war, and this is a very important part of Jesus' preaching. He's saying, no, that had a role once. It's not. It's actually what Jesus wants to point out is now we're about the whole earth. Yeah. And
that particular kingdom, the Israelite kingdom, in a particular spot, had a particular time and place for then, but under the kingdom of Jesus, it's a completely different paradigm, not of this earth.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
and there's a sense of continuity with that, and because that had a role, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the way of winning the world is not going to be anything like that.
Not like the holy war here.
No, that's right. Nothing like that. So a couple of things to point out. First of all is remember when in Genesis 15, when God promised to Abraham, I'm going to give you this land, right, the land of Canaan. Now, you could probably jump on Google and have a look at a map the land of Canaan, Old Testament Israel. You could look up maybe the tribal allotment is kind of that's sort of the ideal boundaries of the land of Canaan, the land that was allotted. And it stretches up to where kind of present day Syria and Lebanon, down to the southern desert there. It's and then from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. And of course, as we know, there were tribes that were given the part of what is now present day Jordan, but that was because those kings came out aggressively, and they beat those kings, and so that was kind of added in a sense. But those areas weren't originally sort of part of that.
I'll put a link to
put a link to a map.
And if you've got a classic old Bible with the maps in the back,
that's right.
They're still accurate. I'll put a link to a couple of maps, or even put a picture up there.
So God is speaking to Abraham about this land, saying, "I'm going to give you this land," and God says, "No, but not now. It's in in the fourth generation." You're going to come back here, and then I'm going to give this land to your descendants. And the reason why not now with Abraham, he's only just one clan at that stage, one family really. But the main reason is because the sin of the Amorites, that is the inhabitants of that land, has not yet reached its full measure. And then in chapter 9 of Deuteronomy, in verse 4, God says to his people, "After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, 'The Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness.' No, it is on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you." Okay, so that's connecting with what he said to Abraham. So God was going to wait until the sin in that land got so bad that it would warrant what essentially was going to be, and this is the important bit, because the promised land represented a kind of re-entry into Eden. That's what that kind of represented. Remember Genesis 3, Eden, Adam and Eve got cast out of Eden. Okay, this is like a sort of provisional new Eden. Which means that if they did the same thing as Adam and Eve and disobeyed God, they would be cast out of the land again. That's the threat is also here. And so this is, and I say provisional because ultimately it was, God has the whole earth in view, okay? But this is, the whole earth is to be this place of harmony with God. But right now, the land of Canaan is going to be this place, this kind of new Eden, okay? So so God doesn't want what happened in the first Eden to happen again. In the first Eden, what happened? Well, Satan got in there and tempted Adam and Eve, and we have the fall, right? So that's got to not happen again. So in a sense,
so this is like a reverse. This is almost like a mirror image.
They're going back in, right?
This is a land, and we're not saying, that the original Garden of Eden was somehow in the Promised Land area.
Yeah.
No one knows.
No,
we're
that's
not
right.
saying that. No one knows where that is. But we're saying that the mirror image being that Satan is occupying this land.
Yeah.
It is now time for them to go in, almost like Satan did into the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, that's right.
And wipe them out and, and cast out the demonic, the evil,
that's right.
So they can possess the land.
Yeah. So, and you hit the nail on the head then, because in a way, and what we see from the various things when God says to his people, don't do the things that these people are doing, and then it goes on to describe those things. What is described is not only idolatry, but occultism to the point of child sacrifice and the
sexual depravity of every kind.
This place is so given over to demonic powers. These are not just empty idols, there are real demonic powers behind these. This is like Satan's capital. This is like so you're right, this is like you're going back into the garden and
casting Satan
and
out.
it's like casting Satan out, and so So because
it's also important to point. Sorry, Matt. It's also important to point because you already made this point, but I just want to re-edify it here. This is a promise that God swore and covenant and promised to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to
the promised land was always ahead. Yeah.
Then to Joseph, there was prophecies around that, and then 400 years later with Moses and the Israelites, God has made that promise to them on the mount with the 10 Commandments saying, if we have a covenant, I want to fulfill this with you. This is your job to do now. You need to go in and do what, like a horrible thing to fulfill, the promises that I made to your, to your ancestors.
But let me explain the horrible thing, because the whole sequence from the Exodus through to the entrance in the Promised Land is a sequence that is richly symbolic in a prophetic sense of what is going to happen in the future, that what is still future. So I talked about Eden as Canaan as a provisional new Eden. Now the ultimate new Eden, of course, is the new heavens and the new earth that is spoke about in Genesis, in Isaiah 65, in Revelation 21 and 22.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what's up ahead. Now, so you've got the entry into the land, the Exodus, set free to enter the Promised Land. Okay, this is, in a sense, what Jesus Christ does for us, sets us free from sin so that we can enter the Promised Land. And the ultimate Promised Land is this new heavens and new earth, the renewed earth. And so that means then that this action of going in and this military action that they've got to engage in, that, in view of all of that symbolism, becomes a very important prefiguration of what precedes the new heavens and the new earth, Revelation 21 and 22, which is the great judgment. So in a sense, they are enacting a one-off prefiguration of the final great judgment. Now, this is why it has to be absolutely complete, right? Because it's a one-off, terrible as it is, prophetic action. Now, remember, as it says, as Paul says, God wants everyone to be saved. God doesn't want anyone to perish, right? But this is a people who had gone so far into idolatry and into this occult practices, and Satan has such a stronghold in this. This, of course, is why these people are terrified, because of the spies came back and said, there are giants in the land. These people seem to us like the Nephilim, the descendants of Anak and so forth. In other words, what they're saying, by referring back to the Nephilim, is that Nephilim, of course, are these quasi-demonic kind of figures, that in this sort of vague memory from the past. They're saying this is where they live, right? This is where these demonic powers have set up their kingdom. That's what they mean by, the giants in the land. It's also significant. Remember, we talked about David completing the conquest. It's also very significant that David's first battle is literally with a giant. With Goliath. Exactly. It's symbolic that yes, he is willing to do what that first generation wasn't willing to do as just a kid, of course. So that they are enacting this. This is very important theological context for understanding this. This is an act of judgment, and the people of Israel at this point are God's instruments of judgment. They are like if you read, if you think this is harsh, have a look at Revelation chapter 19.
I've literally,
you've got it.
I'm holding it right here, Matt, open to me, because I think this is a really important point of linking what is happening in Deuteronomy, what will happen in Joshua and onwards, right? What is commanded in Deuteronomy, and what we see Christ fulfilling at the end in the book of Revelation in chapter 19. Because we have in chapter 19, John finally sees when Christ returns to earth to in one sense, to keep your theme, be the ultimate fulfillment of Deuteronomy here.
Yeah.
But he says, and I saw heaven open, behold, a white horse, and he who sat upon it is called Faithful and True, and in the righteousness he judges the wages, and wages he judges and wages war. This is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
The ultimate fulfillment.
So, and that's
of Jesus.
the thing, if I can just comment on that before we read on. So what God is asking the Israelites to do is nothing that Jesus himself isn't going to come and, you know what I mean? So Jesus himself is coming to do this very thing.
Yeah.
He is the ultimate kind of son of David in that sense, who completes the conquest and eradicates evil.
Just like the theme of from Genesis to Deuteronomy is God saying, wait until the sin is, till the judgment is complete.
Yeah.
The book of Revelation is exactly the same thing.
Exactly the same.
God saying, I'm going to end it all, but not yet, because the sin is, you're still bringing more judgment down.
That's right. And you know, Revelation starts, of course, with the famous four horsemen, right? Yeah. And they go out. And essentially what they do is that they bring the sin of the earth to its full measure. Yeah. So what is God waiting for? Well, there's, of course, the ingathering of the nations, but also there's a sense in which now there is this time of waiting for, as Paul puts it, the power of lawlessness, which is already at work in the world, to come to its full measure. So exactly the same symbolism.
It's exactly.
I'm not going to judge yet. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait until the sin and idolatry of the inhabitants has come to its full measure. Then is the time for judgment.
Now, there's an important point here. If I go back to everyone listening, I hope you can follow along here. We're jumping all over. Yeah. We're jumping all over the beginning and the end of the Bible and all the way through it. So here in Revelation 19, if I read in verse 13 and 14 here, and he, Jesus, is clothed with a robe dipped in blood. That's pretty gruesome imagery. And his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, are following him on white horses.
Yeah.
Now, I know, depending on how you interpret this, who are the armies of heaven who are in fine and white, clean robes?
Well, it's the people of God.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So not only, when we read these things in Deuteronomy, now just to cut to the chase, a sword comes out of Jesus' mouth and he wipes out all of the armies on earth. And it's an absolute bloodbath. It's absolutely ridiculous. The King of Kings, Lord of Lords is proclaimed. Yeah. And he finishes the final battle. Well, it's the final battle. But the point here is we're with him.
Yeah.
If you interpret
that's right. Yeah.
the armies of heaven of those who are redeemed and are wearing the white linen because we've been redeemed and washed clean, which is already a pattern set up in Revelation. If we in that, so as we read this in Deuteronomy, we are also fulfilling this in Revelation with Jesus.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, now there's this period of great, in the ingathering, and everyone, it's like the population of the new Eden or the new heavens and the new earth is being gathered in right now, in that sense, in the biblical sequence. Okay? Yeah. So it's very important to understand. This isn't just God saying, "Oh, these are bad people. Go in and slaughter them." Yeah. No. This is a once-off prefiguration of the great final judgment, because of the symbolism of the land of Canaan, and also, so that's the main idea. But let's also think about what is happening here. So this is in the infancy of God's people, right? They're in their infancy. They're afraid, they're vulnerable, they share the superstitions of it's going to take generations for
400 years. Yeah. This to be completed.
Yeah, that's right. And it's even going to take generations for these people to learn and to lose the patterns of idolatry and so forth, because we've seen how prone they are to this already. And in a sense, the land of Canaan is this kind of holy place where God is going to cultivate his people to be a light to the world, right, and gather in the nations. So this is the sanctuary in the midst of the earth, which is going to be, at least at this stage, a kind of humidity crib for the infant nation. Yeah. And so all bad influences have to be completely eradicated in the land.
And And it's important to, like you say, I think in coming into this and the rest of the history that we read in the Israelites here, to the life of David, covers multiple generations.
Yeah.
They don't do it. I mean, this first generation that walks in under Joshua do amazing things. Joshua and Caleb and the leaders of Israel and the leaders of the tribes do their very best to fulfill everything that God has called them to do.
Yeah.
But then the next generation goes, well,
and
then it goes on and on and on, and it gets worse and worse and worse until we get the ultimate fulfillment in David, like when he comes in and says, right, I'm going to finish the job. It's been going on for 400 years. I've got to really,
That's right. And God says to them here, if you let's say decide, oh, that's a bit harsh, we'll just make treaties with them. God says they will certainly mislead you. So remember, this is a preemptive strike. Preemptive strikes have always been a controversial thing in sort of ethics of
in military and stuff like that.
Sort of in the military world. But see, God knows what's going to happen.
Yeah,
He knows, and this is the ultimate preemptive strike. He says they will certainly, explicitly, again and again, if you let them stay, they will certainly mislead you, and they will draw you to the point where you'll be doing the things that they do, and so in a sense, what happens, that trajectory that you just talked about, them where they go soft, they let the people stay. The book of Judges is really the vindication of all of these. Joshua does a great job. They go in, they win amazing battles. But what you see in Judges chapter 1, at the end of Joshua in Judges chapter 1, is, they went here, but they didn't dislodge this people, or they didn't, or they made those people put them into forced labor rather than driving them out completely. The rest of the book of Judges shows the terrible demise of Israel and the enslavement and the oppression. They're basically in a worse state in the land than they were in Egypt. Because of this compromise.
Because
they didn't do what God said.
Yeah, and it's even interesting, like jumping right to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and this is, Moses finally saying, after the multiple sermons and retelling of the law and clarification, he basically prophesies over the elders of Israel at the very end, before he sings this beautiful song and he goes to die with God. He says, "For I know," this is in chapter 31:29, "For I know that after my death you will act corruptly, and you'll turn away from a way which I've commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days, for you will not do that which is evil. For you will do that which is evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger." Da, 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 da. So Moses, towards the end there, he says, "You guys are rebellious. You're going to. It's an interesting thing because he, in one sense, in some of these things, he's telling them how they're going to be victorious. But then at the end, he's like, "But I know that eventually you'll be rebellious, because you won't have a leader like me. You won't follow God. Your hearts will eventually turn away,
right.
And it's going to be really bad for you in this land."
Yeah, absolutely. And they do get misled, and what actually happens and what they get drawn into. I mean, you get these times where, I mean, even during the time of the kings after David's time, you get Manasseh, for example, who's sacrificing his own sons. Yeah. So those actually in the Davidic line, are being sacrificed in the fire. I mean, these practices were absolutely abhorrent practices.
And it's amazing, there's a whole spiritual element as well here, but even with all the victories that the early generations had in the land, and they drove them out, and they had momentous gains and everything, and then David having momentous gains, it doesn't take much
No, it doesn't. It doesn't take much for them to fall back. Yeah,
for the evil to start seeping back in.
Yeah.
And you realise, my goodness, this is a spiritual battle as much as it is a cultural battle.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this area here.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've set a good precedent of as you know, the hardest part we have to do to approach Deuteronomy. Let's take a quick break, have a bit of a breather here. You know, take a drink of water. Might have to have a little lay down as we're talking about all these heavy things with Deuteronomy, and we're going to wrap up Deuteronomy and the Book of Moses next here on Thrive Deeper. Ahoy there, Thrive family. It's your old mate here, DJ Payne. And something a little bit different for you today. I want to let you know that you can go support us by listening to Thrive Perspectives. I understand that some people still aren't subscribed to Thrive Perspectives, our sister podcast. It's a totally separate RSS feed. It's a totally different podcast. And all you got to do is go to your podcast, application of choice and search for Thrive Perspectives. Will come straight up. And why I'm telling you about it is we have just released an episode that is an interview with the amazing theologian, professor, and missionary Bernie Power. Bernie Power is the nicest guy, and he's an absolute genius and gifted teacher when it comes to all things Islam, Muslim, and the Quran. It's a great interview. I had a great time, and I learnt so much from him. That's on our latest episode of Thrive Perspectives. And the great news is when you go over there and subscribe and have a listen to that episode with Bernie Power about Islam and Christianity, you'll get a special offer to get Bernie Power's new book for about a third of the price that he regularly sells for. It's an amazingly generous offer from Bernie Power, and you can get all that by listening to the latest episode of Thrive Perspectives. If you're like me and you've got Islamic neighbours and friends in the community, this is a great way to listen to it and really get a Christian perspective on their faith and what they believe in. I encourage you to go download and subscribe to that one today. All right, let's get into this and get ready to say goodbye. I'm getting a little bit teary-eyed here. Get ready to say goodbye to this man of God, this amazing prophet, the person of Moses, here as we finish off Deuteronomy on Thrive Deeper. It's Thrive Deeper, episode 120. This is DJ and Matt, and we are wrapping up for now, the book of Deuteronomy and the life of Moses. Now, Matt, we're headlong into this big issue, big problem, big argument that a lot of people have about Deuteronomy, and you've presupposed the whole thing saying this is the most challenging, hardest things to the modern mind that is inquiring about God, inquiring about the Bible, inquiring about the Christian God, the Jewish God, and they come in and they read the book of Deuteronomy and they go, no, can't do it. This is genocide. Yeah. How evil is this? This awful Old Testament God is commanding his people to go in and wipe out these people completely off the land. I can't deal with it.
Yeah. And it is harsh.
Yeah.
And as I've said, it's an act of judgment. Now, I have qualified that with, again, most of the command that's used most of the time is about driving the people out. Yeah. One assumes that it was those who would not be dislodged that were actually slaughtered. Yep. So probably most people weren't wiped out. They were probably driven out of the land. Why are they driven out? Because they're so deeply entrenched, like deeply entrenched in very powerful forms of idolatry, such that actually made these people, the Israelites, incredibly fearful. And the constant temptation to serve these gods was because of their fear of these gods. Because if we don't offer sacrifices to Baal and Ashtoreth and Molech, and then our crops are going to fail, and but even more than that, this fear of these entities and fear of being overwhelmed and battles in the ancient world were always seen as battles between the gods.
Yeah.
So the question here is who is the ultimate God? Who is the great God? And so I think putting ourselves in an ancient context is helpful. And I just want to say a couple of things about that now because, again, we are reading this as modern readers.
Yes.
This is ancient warfare, like this kind of thing. This is not unusual in the ancient world. I mean, these are harsh times.
Yes.
Warfare was a regular part of life, one kingdom against another. As I said, these were always envisaged as our God against your God. A God who does not defeat your enemies is unintelligible in the ancient world. I mean, we look at this and we think, this is a terrible thing. How could a good and loving God do such a thing? That's not what they thought.
No.
What they would think is, how could a good and loving God not destroy those who are entrenched in this kind of evil?
100%.
That was their thing. So, so first of all, this is not unusual for the ancient world. This is, God is showing himself to be the ultimate God who is over all of the other gods. That all of those other gods, they're not real gods. They're nothing like God. They're just empty. I mean, they're empty idols, but at best, powerless spiritual entities before the ultimate power of God.
You read. There's a lot about idolatry. The theme of idolatry is going to really, it's going to pick up and be really thick in the passage in the books going forward. Yeah. There's commandments of not just wiping out the people, but destroying the symbols of these demons. The idols, the carvings, the temples, the poles, all of these things have to be utterly destroyed out of the land, all this type of stuff. Matt, is it fair to say, this might be a controversial thought here, but when in reading through these passages over the years, especially in light of the life of David and the Psalms of David around, when he's a warrior, and this is a really foreign thing to our modern aesthetics and mind and everything like that. A big part of their relationship with God, and dare I say it, their worship or even their obedience to God is in warfare.
Yeah, that's right.
For these people. Yeah. For the Israelite people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that now again, in our minds, our modern mind goes, no. We have a sense, as Jesus rightly said, no, we're in a different paradigm now of peace and turning the other cheek, absorbing, the wrongs of the world, to be able to forgive, to be a light. All these different things are different. But we can see, and we can still, in one sense, get in a mindset of these people were worshipping God and doing the right thing and having a right relationship with him while they were going in at war.
That's right, because that's what God commanded. And the change of plan begins not in the New Testament but in the Old Testament, because when they're back in captivity in Babylon, Babylon is destroyed, but it's a different issue than it was with Pharaoh, because you have Cyrus. God works through Cyrus. Even in Isaiah, refers to Cyrus, the Persian Empire that conquers Babylon, as my servant. They're still slaves under Cyrus. Cyrus sends them out, rebuild your temple. Yeah. So it's not an uprising. This is not they're not.
It's not war.
Yeah, they're not bringing down the Persians and when they go back, they're still servants to the Persian Empire, and so there's no sense of rise up against the Persians and rebel. Yeah. In fact, they're doing their best actually to not do that. And so the change of plan, already you see that change of plan kick in during the Old Testament, highlighting the fact that the invasion, occupation of the land is a one-off thing. Now you do get an uprising under the Maccabees, but that in itself is interesting. There's that's we're outside the Bible there. In a sense. The Antiochus IV, the Greek emperor who annexed, Judea. He was incredibly cruel, quite unreasonable, outlawed Judaism, was coming in and slaughtering the people for their refusal to worship his gods. And so what you get there is really a reactive war that amazingly they win. But then they set up an independent kingdom that just crumbles after generations. It just ends up being just as corrupt as any other kingdom. So, but already within the Old Testament period, the plan changes. I think it's important to recognize that. But you're right. The thing to recognize, and this is another important thing, is that people think that you can dip in anywhere in the Bible and pull out something and just apply it without any, to today. And that's actually not how the Bible works. The Bible is primarily a story. Yeah. It's an unfolding revelation. Now, of course, there are principles that apply throughout, the Ten Commandments, but a lot of what you see is designed for that time and for what God is doing then, and it's moving towards something. So,
could that be described as a evolving dispensation of God?
Well, in a way, you could, if you must use that language, yes, you could describe it like that. It's God is working in a particular way in this time, and you get a gradual move away from that, really, and
yes.
And so I think sometimes we think we want to look at what Moses does and the law of Moses and say, here's the ultimate expression of the will of God. And yes, it is an expression of God's will, but for that time, because look, and God is a God who judges. God is not a God who tolerates evil forever, and he does judge, and because he's just, and God's justice is an expression of God's love and goodness. Okay, so it's not. This is this is consistent with the character of God, but the ultimate. This is what we need to keep coming back to. The ultimate expression. If we want to point to something that is the ultimate expression of the character and the will of God, you point to the person of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Everything else is a process, an unfolding story, including necessary evils. Everything culminates in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Now, as we've pointed out, Jesus Christ also is, there will come a time when Christ comes and brings judgment, and that's what we should expect.
Is it important to point out in talking about this over the years with different people around this topic? I've sometimes pointed out that, like, though God, again, this is symbolic, this is practical, this is a dispensation of God in this time for them to be doing this, going in and conquering the people, wiping out entire areas and setting up, the tribes there in the Promised Land. But ultimately, and this is one of the things I think that points us towards Jesus so much, ultimately, even when they succeed under David, they finally succeed under David.
Yeah.
Solomon gets set up. Well, within one generation, they've fallen away again. And even though, it's almost like God is saying, I've sort of seen it as like, I will give you this promised land, I'll give you this Eden again, just so you can fall out of it again, so you understand your need for something more.
Yeah, there's a sense of that, absolutely. Yeah.
Because within a generation after Solomon, the kings are coming and going, the tribes are, divided. And ultimately you have prophets like Jeremiah saying, no, the judgment is now on us.
Yeah, that's right.
The judgment is now on us. We came into the land, we occupied the land. God said, here's the promise, the covenant. If you do this, he will look after us. We've disobeyed the covenant, so now we have to just ride on what God is telling us. He's going to judge us.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and
then they are driven out of the land. So in a sense, God is not treating them
differently.
There's no favoritism necessarily, because once they fall into that idolatry, they are then driven out of the land, and that's what we get. I think it's also important to point out that the invasion of the Promised Land isn't like an expansion of the movement or of the kingdom of God in any sense. You know, skeptics will often say, it all spread by the sword, you know, and no, this is not a spread like let's make everyone worship, you know, and again, referring to, like, for example, early spread of Islam, very much at the point of the sword. You know, areas were annexed, and you either worship this way, you can convert or die. That's largely how that movement spreads. This is not what this is. This is clearing this space for these people to live in, but they're not converting these people at the point of the sword, or this is just a place for them to live. And the question is, are you going to be any different? And we see eventually that they're not any different, and then of course they are then driven out. Are quite cruelly driven out, because the Assyrians, first of all, who came through and drove out, destroyed the northern tribes, viciously. And then the Babylonians who came in. It was you know, in many ways more vicious, because
they starved them out.
Yeah, they starved them out. You know, they're using real terror tactics, because these nations would come in and they would, you know, take people and impale them on poles all along the road, and they would do terrible things
cruel.
Put fear into. So in a sense, they would suffer in some sense in worse ways, really, because it turned out that they weren't any better. So I guess there's a natural struggle here with this idea of judgment. People are, you know, we like to think, well, God just should accept everyone, and no matter what we do. And actually, God is willing to do that, but God is holy, and you know, and God cares about how we live and what we do, and so God is also, therefore, as a good God and a holy God, God also expects holiness and goodness, and so where that is absent, there is, as a natural consequence, the principle of justice kicks in, and there is judgment. So, you know, God is a God who judges. He is a God who will judge. And you could look at this, what we're looking at today in Deuteronomy, you could look at even Revelation chapter 19 and say, how could it be right that God would do such a thing? We need that. The only way to answer that is to say it's right because God does it. Because who defines what is right and wrong? Who defines what can be expected of us as human beings? Who defines what justice is? Again, this isn't, because ultimately God says, vengeance is mine. Vengeance is something, judgment only belongs to God. You know, Jesus is very emphatic about that, even, in fact, in the Old Testament as well. You know, they're forbidden to take personal vengeance. Don't be the judge. God alone is the judge. So you know, so this is not, this act of people doing this judgment thing is a real exception to the rule, and it's not about judgment in we hate these people, let's kill them. It's actually something far more formal and far more you know, symbolic and important in that case.
Well,
it's heavy. It's still heavy because it's a heavy, you know, it's a heavy issue, and the memory of that in these people is something that becomes a warning to them. You who have been the instruments of judgment and have been close to that act, now be warned by that, lest you also come under this judgment. Of course, we know the story, and that they did.
We get so after the I want to move away from the I'm getting depressed now thinking about all this harsh and judgment. So at the end of Deuteronomy, you know, Moses, you know, is he has his sermons, he's encouraging, he's telling the law again, he's getting clarified around certain elements of the law, instructing this next generation of what they're going to do, really charging them. He gets a bit depressive at the end and is like, look, I think you're going to fall away in the future. He becomes, very prophetic, looking ahead of what's happening. And then he has this song for a couple of chapters. And who knew that Moses, was this, this songwriter of it. Yeah. But it's an interesting prophetic song at the end of Deuteronomy that, looks into the land that's coming, looks into where they're going, calling God our rock, over and over again, sort of, despising the people that they're going into and why they have to do what they do. Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting song. Any commentary on this ancient song of Moses here?
Let me just first say something about because there's a lot of dark stuff here. Mm. All of that is set against the fact that God is saying to his people, I have saved you. You didn't have to do anything to earn it. It wasn't because of your righteousness. I've set my affection on you. I've given you my grace. And I come into this land and let me bless you. That's essentially what he's saying, and ultimately that blessing is going to go to all the earth. Okay. So there's this remarkable ray of light here, of a God who is so gracious and so loving. But if that is rejected, then all that's left is judgment. This is a God that is saving his people from, ultimately is a God who saves from judgment. Yeah. But we have to understand, the principle of justice to understand the principle of grace. And so the song of Moses is important because a lot of what these people will remember, they'll remember through the act of singing.
Okay.
And so that becomes a kind of a way of remembering all of these things, and the storytelling and the theological principles in that song are something that they are to rehearse and sing, and that's going to stay with them.
Yeah, it's a bizarre. I encourage you, if you haven't,
like the hymn at the end of the sermon, isn't it?
Yeah, if you haven't read through this and taken time to read through the song of Moses at the end of his life, it's a bizarre doom and gloom. It's such a contrast between things are going to fail, things are going to go really wrong, God's going to judge you, but then God's going to vindicate you, and it's a really roller coaster of emotional thing at the end of his life. There in the song, Moses brings the people together. He then, in chapter 33, it's like an echo of, the end of Jacob's life at the end of Genesis. Moses then prophesies over all of the tribes. Yeah. Gives each of the tribe of let Levi do this and let this tribe do that and let this tribe do that. He gives a prophecy, and then we have 34, which obviously, was written by Joshua and the team around Moses at the end, or kept in there because it records the very mysterious death of Moses.
Yeah, and there's even something profoundly symbolic about him dying just on the border to the promised land. I mean, there's a sense, of course, Moses, in one sense, goes into the real promised land. I mean, he goes, he is ushered into a heavenly kingdom, in retrospect. So, in a sense, death becomes that Jordan, moment really. And so, but of course, Moses is not entering the land because even he did the wrong thing. Yeah. And so he stands as a kind of warning because he's a prophet, and invariably prophets not only spoke God's word, they embodied it.
Yeah.
And so God's saying to Moses, you can't enter the land because you struck the rock rather than speaking to the rock. It's actually Moses. It's not just because it's like, man, God's being mean to Moses. After all that he's done, can't he just forgive that?
Yeah.
Well, no, this is actually part of Moses' role. Moses is actually got to embody God's message, and God's message to his people is, in order to enter the promised land, you need to actually do what I say. You need to listen and heed the word of God, and so even to his very last, Moses kind of embodies a warning to God's people.
Now, I wanted to finish this last little bit here, and it's lovely to read that last chapter there, but I can't read that last chapter about the death of Moses, nobody knowing where he is. He sort of disappeared. Joshua, is filled with the Spirit of God, Spirit of wisdom. All the Israelites mourn and weep for Moses for days and days and days. And I read that, and straight away I go, in the parlance of our modern web culture, it's like there's a little hyperlink. If I click on that verse, it immediately takes me to Jude, the book of Jude.
Yeah.
And in Jude, 8, 9, and 10, we have, this is, again, right before the book of Revelation. Yet in the same manner, these men also by dreaming defile the flesh, reject authority, and revile angelic majesties. This is talking about false prophets, false teachers.
Yeah.
But Michael, the archangel, when he disputed with the devil and argued about the body of Moses, did not dare pronounce against him a railing judgment, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Now, hang on. Where's that in Deuteronomy? I didn't see that in Deuteronomy. Where this is just for a little footnote there, because some of us, when we do read through Jude, we're going to read this and go, hang on, Michael disputed Satan about the body of Moses? Yeah. What is this about?
Yeah.
I thought I'd throw that to you at the end of the episode there, Matt.
And the answer is I don't know. Look, probably, there's probably a tradition. This is picking up on what is probably a well-known tradition about coming out of rabbinic stories, or that may go back a while, about the body of Moses, because the body of Moses, no one knew where he was buried. So there's some kind of story behind that.
Yeah. So whether or not that story, and again, this is an important point, because I believe it or not, I've heard sermons, dodgy sermons based around this one verse. So, but the little point here is whether or not this actually happened, as in Michael the archangel came down and they fought over Satan's body somehow. The point that Jude is making here, even if it is an apocryphal story, even if it's mythology, the point he's making is not that it actually happened.
Yeah.
It's the fact that the holy angel, did not try to do any spiritual weirdness with this demon, with Satan. All he had to do was say, "The Lord rebuke you."
Yeah, that's
he did it in the power of God.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, don't get sidetracked around this body of Moses and stuff like that. We can sometimes get sidetracked into that type of thing.
Yeah, and he has this. He stands on Mount Nebo and he has this view, across the Jordan Valley, the top of the Dead Sea there, and into the Promised Land. And I've stood in that place and looked at that view, and I've I think of Moses there looking across, but we know that Moses goes to a better place, and the whole story anticipates something more. We could say, Moses doesn't enter the Promised Land, but the Promised Land was really a symbol of something greater, and Moses inherits what is greater. But that magnifies the warnings, that magnifies the seriousness, the importance of no compromise, that we need to be willing to, Jesus says, if your hand calls you to sin, cut it off. And he's not being literal, but he's saying that kind of drastic measures, that's almost harking back to the drastic measures that were needed in, when the people came into Canaan. Like, let nothing pull you away, let nothing undermine you. You've got to, this is so important, because we are on the cusp. We're on the cusp of a promised land. And, we get one life, and our decisions are so, so important. And as it says in Psalm 95, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. And it refers to that generation who did not enter their rest, and so there's the warning there as we anticipate a greater promised land up ahead. I think we should make sure we take it every bit as seriously, because the issues are great, but that's only because the future is absolutely glorious.
I've got the same feeling in my stomach as I have after I come off, one of those crazy spinning theme park rides. You go to one of those roller coaster theme park rides or something like that. You go on a ride and you come off with this queasy feeling. That's how I feel as I get out of the book of Deuteronomy. It is such a roller coaster of emotions. As we say goodbye to Moses and we think about everything that he sings about there at the end, I pray that you've gotten as much out of this section that we've gone through in the Old Testament as we've gotten out of it, because it is such a pattern and such a foreshadowing and such an example of our Christian life today. Now, next fortnight, we leave the Old Testament behind and we go all the way to the book of Acts. We're looking at the Acts of the Apostles, the early church there. Make sure you head over to the website, look at our show notes, and go support our sister podcast, Thrive Perspectives, and especially the interview with Bernie Power we've just done over there on Islam, the Muslim people. I know you're going to enjoy that one as well. All right, we'll see you next time here on Thrive Deeper.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew and DJ really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading in the Bible as you go through it with Thrive. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all of our resources and much more at our website, thrivetoday.tv. The Thrive Today Network is on Facebook. Our Facebook page and links to our community groups are waiting for you. Just search and like Thrive Today page in Facebook now. Visit ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Deeper. If you appreciate what we do and want to help us reach more people, go to ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Deeper. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper into God's Word and thrive. This was another DJP.FM production.